This week, the GSMA launched its latest report, Driving Digital Transformation of the Economy in South Africa, highlighting the critical role of mobile technology in shaping the nation's economic future. And to unpack the report's key findings, I spoke to Angela Wamola, GSMA's head of Sub-Saharan Africa, sharing insights into the opportunities and challenges of South Africa's digital transformation journey. Angela, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this show.
Angela, let's begin by asking you to give us a brief overview on the GSMA report's purpose and key findings for South Africa's digital economy.
So we've embarked on a journey to partner with our countries, governments, and private sector to really understand how we can drive digital transformation of the economies in Africa in general, and more importantly, at a national level. So in South Africa, we have done this report, this study, and it's to look at the opportunities, policy reforms, and the role of mobile in unlocking the potential. We understand that mobile is essential for the digital economy in South Africa, but we also wanted to unlock and understand what are the significant challenges in the sector in their ability to become an enabler for other sectors in South Africa, including the ability for government to be more productive, as well as remove inefficiencies by leveraging the digital technologies. That's 5G and beyond, looking at cloud computing, emerging tech such as AI, and thereby look at what is the targeted recommendations in terms of policy reforms that can address these challenges. And so what is the digital economic partnership and potential that exists in each of these sectors to unlock their contribution to the GDP at the end of the day.
And so what did you find? How is it working in South Africa?
So, when you look at the direction set by the National Development Plan 2030, the government has maintained its focus on achieving economic transformation and poverty reduction through sustainable economic growth and job creation. When you look at the real GDP per capita in South Africa, it grew steadily between 1999 and the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. But the rate of growth was below global averages, nevertheless achieving significant progress during that period. But in the years since then, the real GDP per capita has been stagnant and in recent years declined, with a growth averaging at 0.8% for the period between 2012 and 2024. So the question is, with the unemployment rate remaining very, very high, a high estimated employment rate among our youth, and inequality, across, the population, and being actually the highest in the world, and a poverty rate estimated at 62.6%, we ask ourselves, what role can technology play in terms of leapfrogging some of these systemic, infrastructural, physical challenges towards becoming more of a contributor to, both our economic and social challenges? So I think it is clear that the National Development Strategy addresses and plays a critical role in all of this. There's lots of strategies that are already forming the bedrock of a clear digital future. We have the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, SA Connect, the DC Digital Master Plan, as well as National Digital and Future Skills Strategy. So all these come together to create a very good foundation of a well-developed digital policy environment that covers all the critical aspects of policy that are needed. So what therefore would be the next step in terms of making this strategy work? The report looks at the sector and very clearly identifies that the telecommunications operators are the foundation of the digital economy. Together, they generated about 200 billion South Africa rand per year in revenue and account for almost 4 to 5% of the country's total GDP. They also generate about 4% in tax revenues collected by the government and are responsible for another 30,000 jobs through direct employment. So if the telecommunications services only accounts for a third of the total digital economy, that's about 10 to 15% of the GDP, it means that there is a lot of contribution from the sector in terms of the enablement effect it would have on other sectors if they leverage the digitalization and digital technologies that exist today.
So the platform is there. I also understand as far as mobile phone penetration is concerned, South Africa is really up there and comparable with even some developing nations. So then I guess there must be a gap between the platform being there, the mobile penetration being there, and what should be being reached in terms of what can be done with such a platform and such a cell phone penetration. What's the reason for that gap?
Indeed, the country really has made significant progress in developing the digital economy of the recent years, and it does stand out as being far ahead of most other countries in the region in terms of coverage, in terms of adoption, mobile internet adoption, and innovation. But however, when you look at peers in other countries, like you've mentioned in the BRICS area, we look at it's falling behind many of its peer group of nations. And we try to unlock in what aspects is that falling behind. In the digital competitiveness ranking, South Africa in the BRICS countries is, right at the back on the fourth. In terms of the number of people graduating in STEM fields per 1,000 of the population by 2020, we looked at South Africa had a 1.1 people graduating compared to India at 1.6 and Russia all the way at 3.6. So, the investment obviously in digital literacy, digital skills is there, but more needs to be done. And then on the flip side, when you look at the investment side, South Africa's mobile sector needs continued investment, particularly as I've mentioned, looking at 5G investment to cover the population or cover the segments of the industries that they want to digitalize and in keeping up with other countries. So we see that on a per capita basis, South African MNOs invest more than operators in the BRICS countries at 27.6 US dollars per person, compared to India at a much lower level of $6.2 per person. And so that comparison shows that India is making a lot more for their investment per person compared to South Africa. And at the same time, all the BRICS countries have achieved more than at least 50% of their population covered by 5G, whereas South Africa is still lagging at about 33%, meaning that there's still more investment that needs to be done. At the same time, the expenditure is much, much higher per person than these other countries. So what do we need to do to make the investment match the needs of rising broadband speeds in South Africa? I think we need to look at the economic and sort of regulatory environment that South Africa is facing that's putting pressure on the infrastructure investment. We see a lot of rising interest rates, inflationary pressures when continuing to invest in 4G, 5G, fiber, and meeting various license obligations as well as overheads for closing both the usage and the coverage gap. So the national strategy for the digital migration, sunsetting of 2G and 3G networks will obviously have major implications for the way MNOs are able to access spectrum in the future. Their ability to reuse what they already have as opposed to investing in new spectrum, I think also puts a lot of pressure on them in how they can reuse what they already have sunk as investment. And we can't underestimate the weakened consumer spending power that has also sort of lower the demand for usage of data and the affordability of the same compared to the recommended expenditure. So in Africa in general, we see that 7% of our wallet goes towards data and digital services, whereas the average is globally is around 2%. So that sort of weakened consumer spending power has also impacted the usage per user on data. In Africa, it's roughly around 2 GB per user compared to the global average, which is around 18 and 20 GB per person. So you see how that the economics of, the usage of what has been invested as in return for the same, infrastructure in terms of coverage yields more value for peer countries for the South Africa as compared to South Africa itself. So we have to look at how can we remove this pressure on MNOs so that they are able to compete, they're able to remain, their investments yield, value and are financially sustainable even as costs continue to grow, because these are coming from macroeconomic pressures that beyond the control of South Africans. And so from a customer perspective as well, the affordability of devices remains a challenge, particularly those in low-income households. So again, what can we do to unlock the pressure on the cost of devices through taxes that are levied on them, such as import duties, excise duty on the services as well. But despite the well-developed sector, as I've mentioned, and the policy in South Africa, implementation, therefore, will be critical of these policies so that South Africa doesn't lag behind and is able to mitigate the risks and uncertainty for investors who need to continue investing in the sector for the long run.
So when you look at our peer groups in the BRICS nations, and some are very developed, more developed than others, which sectors do you think in South Africa, when you start to look at what's happened in other areas, might be transformed much more by digital adoption?
When you look at the digital economy and the sort of the addressable market, it's estimated to reach 15 to 20% of total GDP by 2025 and grow by another 10 to 15% for the next 5 years. And the impact will be in agri-tech, where we see digitalization impacting crop yields and increasing the yields by 20%, and therefore the profits in terms of productivity should increase by another 23%. When you look at digital services in general, so when you look at enterprises, cybersecurity, hosting of cloud, IoT, that will all help increase manufacturing productivity by 25%, because all these services not only increase productivity, but they reduce, like we say, the inefficiencies, and more importantly, particularly in the manufacturing and mining sector, reduce safety hazards and security associated with these industries. We also see the efficiency of and the quality of the transport sector increasing because of leveraging IoT and analytics. Digital services and training of SMSCs will lead to business growth of more than 87%, and inefficiencies will increase by 79%. And not to underestimate also the digital health is very, very critical in South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa at large, because of the health outcomes associated, more access to health, digital health, more access to health insurance coverage simply by leveraging, digitalization of the sector. And today, e-government already, South Africa is ranked the highest in Africa on the UN e-government index as at 2024. And we see more than 89% of South Africa taxpayers actually use digital services. So there's a lot that can be done across all these sectors to yield that 10 to 15% growth in GDP in the next 5 years, if we look at the reforms that are relevant and necessary to unlock more value for more South Africans to come online by 2025. And continued to 2028 and 2030.
All right, so we've been comparing our South Africa to its peers, mostly beyond our continent, but new members, Ethiopia and Egypt. How are they sitting along their digital economy move?
So we have done a similar study in Nigeria, which we published in May, and another one in Ethiopia, which we recently did about 3 weeks ago in Ethiopia. And we see the same effect in terms of, all industries are struggling as we know it. We are facing lots of macroeconomic headwinds in Africa that are, affecting the devaluation of our local currencies, as well as skyrocketing fuel costs, because the nature of the industry is that it relies a lot of energy. And unfortunately for Africa, only 20% of the energy consumed by the sector is through renewable energies. However, in countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, a lot of the energy is actually renewable, coming from hydroelectric power, solar, and wind. Whereas in the bigger countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, it's really still a lot fossil-based, energy consumption. And that obviously then has that effect on the unaffordability of the costs and the skyrocketing costs in managing these networks because of the over-reliance on fossil fuels, given the dependencies we have with the macroeconomic headwinds that we're facing. And so when we try to understand that we do all have the same potential of unlocking the same value, more or less across the different sectors, as I've mentioned, for South Africa. So the question is, what are the policy reforms and recommendations for each of these countries, having looked at their, developmental goals, their developmental plans, as we've mentioned, the strategies that they have in place to accelerate the implementation of various policies that are already in place or need to be put in place for that enablement effect. And so I think what's common across these countries that you've mentioned is that given the nature of the mobile economy and mobile infrastructure in unlocking value for the entire country, one of the critical recommendations that we are making is that it's a high time that governments consider categorizing network infrastructure as critical national infrastructure, because it brings a lot of protection around safeguarding the investment that has already gone into place and signaling to private investors that we're really looking at growing the investment and protecting the investment, so that losses that are avoidable, such as vandalism through theft or through fiber cuts, can be avoided and can save huge, these companies making losses in the millions of, just replacing these, this equipment or the fiber. And so in that in itself, it also looks at how, similar to the energy sector, where the energy is safeguarded, with critical national infrastructure, we can also benefit from priority in having grid power that's clean power, providing energy to this infrastructure, as opposed to relying on alternative energy sources such as diesel generators to complement, which are incredibly expensive for Africa.
Angela, Wamola, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
And thank you so much. And I hope that you have enjoyed our insights.